I've been asked to talk about solidarity. Some of you will know most or all of what I'm going to say, so apologies to you, but I hope some of it will be useful. I'm actually going to start a bit more widely and come down to more particular things, because, as both speakers have said, there's a critical conjuncture at the moment for the people who are trying to either fight for their national rights and or try to survive or bring down the Assad regime, resist sectarianism, whether you're talking about Syria, Iraq or Kurdistan. So of course you could say that all those people need solidarity, and to come back to Cameron's last point, the stronger the independent or relatively independent forces are, and the more solidarity they have, the less easy it is for them to be co-opted by imperialism in one way or another. So that would be my starting point. But I mean, on a general level, if you look at Syria and Iraq, including Kurdistan, you've had many hundreds of thousands, maybe more than that, killed in the last few years in Iraq in various ways since the height of the Ba'athist regime, through the invasion, and now in Syria. And you've also, at the moment, you've got millions of people with their lives turned absolutely upside down by the regime in Iraq, the invasion, the sectarian strife that the West, of course, has promoted. ISIS, as Gilbert explained, is a kind of largely a product of that. So what have we got in terms of people who need solidarity? Well, the mainstream opposition in Syria, a lot of it has been pretty much crushed, but there are still some people there, so I'm going to start with that. And of course some of it has collapsed into the arms of sponsors like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, etc. And as Gilbert pointed out, if they'd got the weapons they needed, that situation might not have arisen. And of course this reminds me, by the way, of exactly what happened when the Kurds and the Shia rose up in Iraq at the end of the Gulf War. They basically, you know, the Americans and the British, the Germans, what have you, they don't like mass uprisings, trends within that of independent thought, interested in national rights, social justice. They don't like it. And of course we almost saw something similar with Kobani. I mean, maybe it was to an extent American reluctance to see ISIS get too out of hand, but I think also the mass pressure from the Kurds and their supporters pointed up the embarrassment of letting this town fall. You know, some of the main people fighting ISIS doing it quite well, and we're supposed to be fighting ISIS too. So you've got these millions of people in this situation who need assistance. And besides the Syrian opposition, which is trying to keep going, you've also got Rojava. I think coming up, Aleppo may be critical quite soon. The government forces are making headway, and ISIS are making headway. Now there are opposition forces there, and there's I believe there's at least one substantial area controlled by mixed Kurdish and Arab fighting force. So it's going to be pretty grim if and when there's a fight for Aleppo. So that, you know, if that happens, they too will need solidarity. Say something about Rojava. Again, I expect most of you know, but of course they declared autonomy in 3 areas of northern Syria in January 2012, when it was made clear that I think it was the Geneva II conference was not going to allow the Kurds to go there as Kurds. That, in other words, as usual, their national rights were not going to be recognised. Well, why is it important? Well, of course, the people there are fighting to survive, on the one hand, in the face of ISIS. And, you know, we don't need to be in any doubt about what ISIS can do. I mean, I think in terms of killing people, probably the largest number they've killed was in Shengal in northern Iraq in the summer before the intensified siege of Kobani got underway. But also the people in Kobani are fighting for a model of participatory democracy and gender equality, and also, which is important in itself to us as socialists or anti-racists, but it's particularly important in the context of Iraq and Syria at the moment. They're fighting for, they do believe in respect for diversity, and I think they probably have drawn some lessons from the past, and they're not in favour of a narrowly they're not trying to set up a narrow nationalist state, but so they do believe in respect for diversity of religion and ethnic groups, and that's obviously important in the present climate. And there is also increasing cooperation between them and some parts of the opposition in Syria, so there's a load of reasons. Right, okay. Just a bit more on why we need to support Kobani. I think it's still crucial because, as people have said, the US, EU governments are not very happy when they see people fighting for their own independent ideas. People are outside their control, ideas of gender equality, social justice. I think the Americans were forced, as I said, to intervene to some degree, but you have to look at the reluctance to meet the very reasonable demand for anti-tank weapons and other weapons. You know, ISIS had all this gear that they got mainly in Iraq. They got all this gear, and it was very difficult, obviously, as people know, for the people in Kobani with not much more than Kalashnikovs and RPGs to defend themselves. And it took over a month, maybe 6 weeks at the most crucial point when it was really touch and go whether they would survive. It took a month or 6 weeks for it to be allowed by the powers that be, grudgingly, to have a moderate quantity of heavy weapons be brought through by forces from the Kurdish regional government area. The PYD leader commented, of course, that he'd been going around Europe and they wouldn't sell them weapons, never mind give them. So again, this points up the reluctance of the powers that be to support such forces. So that makes it all the more important that the diaspora and all the rest of us should be supporting them. And I do think that, again, Cameron touched on it, you know, will the PKK and the PYD be co-opted? Well, you know, we hope they won't, and you know, they've been in politics for a long time, I mean, they know how it goes, but of course the Americans and the EU governments will be doing their best either to break them or co-opt them. I think that's one thing we can be sure about. And they may well, of course, try to use the sort of tribal dynasty that we unfortunately have in parts of the KRG territory, and maybe they can use the PUK as well. So that's sort of why. To come back to what people can do, I'll say a little bit about Syria. I'll start off on Iraq, actually. A bit about Iraq. I think we've got a big problem here because there aren't many solidarity organisations. There's not much I'm aware of. Huge numbers of people displaced, of course, by the war. Some of them have managed to go back. Conditions still very dire. But since the summer, 400,000 or 500,000 people displaced from the towns in the plain of Mosul, people in Mosul having problems, and the people in Shengal that were attacked by ISIS. The international agents, well, the international governments and the relief agencies haven't really stepped up. People are not getting enough warmth, shelter, help. In the case of Shengal, the other day the PKK leadership issued a statement saying that the situation for the 10,000 people still on the mountain is fairly critical, and they intend to attempt to liberate the area in the next month, presumably meaning before winter sets in. They said that, you know, they do really need anti-tank weaponry, etc. for that, which they don't have, but they're going to try, in particular, to clear the area to the north of Shengal to reopen the corridor and do more than that. And they would hope that the Kurdistan regional government will assist them. I expect they're not holding their breath, but they hope they would assist them. So I imagine there's going to be more fighting around there. So that is one area. Also to do with Iraq, there is Roj Women, Kurdish Women's Organisation, and Peace in Kurdistan here have set up a campaign to try to aid the Yazidi women and other women who have suffered at the hands of ISIS. And they do have some contacts elsewhere in Iraq, so that is one area to work on. But I think that's another area we need to look at, Iraq, because there's not much in the way of solidarity organisations. And I think maybe campaigns around refugees might be one way to approach it. On Syria, just briefly, again, we've supported a smallish organisation called the Syria Solidarity Movement since a conference that we helped organise some months ago. They, at the moment, they're running a thing called Forgotten Cities, if you want to look on Facebook page, on the Facebook page. It's called Syria's Forgotten Cities. There's a SAS event at the end of the week, and there's an arts exhibition fundraiser. On Rojava in Syria, there's masses people can do. There's a London group which does the other things, but is doing solidarity for the Kurds in Syria. Estella's here. If anybody's interested, that group is open to people. You can get the details off her or off Glyn Harris on Game Facebook. I would urge people to do some reading if they feel they don't know much about the Kurdish issue. Cameron's given a good rundown. I've got a list here that has some websites and books on it. There's a big diaspora. There's a lot of Kurdish activists running things, as I'm sure you know. So if you don't know much about it and would like to get interested, you can contact Peace in Kurdistan and talk to them. They've got materials around unbanning the PKK. But just go on Facebook and find out what the community centres are doing. There are people who post stuff, so there's news all the time. If people want to have a look at this list and get some ideas. There are, certainly in Haringey and Hackney, there are events all the time. People can just go along and talk to people and join in. One important campaign is for material aid. Heva Saw, if you look that up on Facebook, they send medical aid, and they're running campaigns for medical aid for Kobani and Shengal. And massive numbers of refugees around Kobani. That's one of the places. It's not just Kurdistan, Iraq. Turkish state, of course, doesn't mind them coming out of Syria. Not so ready to help. A lot of aid is needed. That's one thing people can do. Working on the ban on the PKK. And pressure on EU governments for, I think, generally refugees for not meeting their obligations. I do think that's a way into it. You know, people can work with the movement against xenophobia, I'm sure, who are campaigning, I'll stop in a second, who are campaigning around this disgraceful decision to stop paying for the search and rescue missions in the Mediterranean. Of course, that involves all sorts of people. There was a Syrian boat that went down the other day. So Estella's here, if anybody doesn't know her, she's back. So if people want, that's one way of making contact, is that people can talk to me. I'm sure other people have got ideas and stuff they're involved with. I hope I haven't missed out too much, and